This Emmy season, consider the most talked about series of the year.
What have you done?
The Guardian Hails, Netflix's Adolescence, is the closest thing to TV perfection in decades.
I haven't done anything.
The Hollywood Reporter exclaims, newcomer Owen Cooper is spectacular. Stephen Graham has never been better. The Playlist adds, Aaron Doherty's performance is pure magic.
You need to sit down, Jamie.
Do not tell me when to sit down!
Rolling Stone declares Adolescence is soul-shaking television. For your Emmy consideration, Outstanding Limited Series.
Hi, everyone. Have you ever had the conversation with a friend who works in the same industry and you complain about your jobs and the people you work with maybe, and you say that if you guys could just work together at the same place, you could really do it right? Last week, I got to actually do that and make that dream come true. Chris Rosen, he's the Ankler's new deputy editor. You've also heard him before on this podcast. He's one of my favorite people to yell about awards season with. We did it live on stage at the Montclair Film Festival last fall and other times just in bars in New York City as much as we can. Now, Chris is here at the Ankler. He will be on this podcast a lot more often. He'll be bringing his hot takes, his deep knowledge of both Oscar and Emmy history, and who knows what else. We have a lot of ideas in the works. So in this week's show, I'm welcoming Chris to the Ankler and to this show. We're going to catch up on how he's been covering this Emmy season in his previous job at Gold Derby, and we'll be making our picks for some of the standout shows that are premiering in the last few days, right as the Emmy qualifying window closes. After that, you'll hear my conversation with Jason Segel. We talked about the second season of Shrinking, which is also in the Emmy fold, and how he's mapping out his career at this point after being on television for over 2 decades. I'm Katey Rich. This is the Prestige Junkie Podcast. Okay, Chris Rosen, this is so exciting. We've been waiting for this moment for so long. I hope people listening are as excited about this as I am.
I feel like they maybe will be. Who knows? Leave us a comment, I feel like.
We're going to make them excited. We're going to bring them in. And we should say, we've talked about this behind the scenes. You have other jobs at the Ankler. You'll be editing a lot of stuff. So we're not going to promise everybody weekly Chris and Katey shouting sessions, but we're going to have you on as much as we can. We're going to figure it out. Email us if there's things you want to hear us talk about, I guess. This is a back and forth now. It's been me manning the ship alone, and now I have a companion in the award season waters. It's so good to have you. How's this Emmy season been for you so far?
Oh, just great, Katey. How about you? It's just not a lot of shows to worry about or anything. It's totally fine.
I have watched so much television over the past few months, and I feel like I've made the most of it. And you know this feeling too. Like you watch a show, you're like, okay, what can I make out of this? Who can I interview after doing this? And I do feel like between the two of us, we have maybe watched everything. I haven't like perfectly compared notes, but more often than not, I've been glad I've watched these shows, right?
It's a great time for TV. There's a lot of good TV, and there's just too much of it. I mean, like we're saying, like we are doing this for our careers, and we can't keep up with it. So imagine an Emmy voter or somebody who in the industry. How are they going to keep up? But they do, and I think that we see that the good shows people are watching. So that'll be fun.
So, I mean, there's so many angles we could take on Emmy season, and we'll be talking about it more as this show goes on. But we are, as this episode is airing, Emmy eligibility period is over. And there was this kind of last minute rush of shows. And it happens every year. I feel like it's happening less. Like May is a tricky time to premiere your show out there. But there was a few things that were brand new, a couple returning things. What stood out to you from like this last week or two of the rush to make it to the Emmy deadline?
I mean, I think like the rush is one of the issues, right? Like it's almost too late to break through. I was thinking even like the 4 seasons, which I really liked, that was May 1st. And even that feels like, oh, is that too late? But now we have like the stuff that's premiering now, which is like The Better Sister, right? Or like Mountain Head, which we could talk about, these shows that a movie in that case that are like right at the deadline, just like there it is. So you really have to hope that people haven't already just checked out on what they're going to vote for. That's one of the things I always wonder is like have people already been like, well, I watched White Lotus like 2 months ago. I already know I'm going to nominate that in a bunch of places. I don't really have room to consider these other shows.
Especially in those acting categories where I think I've talked about before, like you can nominate as many supporting actors from the White Lotus as you want. You just fill them out on your list. So if like you have 8 people from the White Lotus you want to nominate, you're like, okay, done. Moving on to the next category. That's how that still works, right? I feel like that changes every year.
It's not an unlimitted ballot anymore, but you could still do that. So like, I mean, you could just fill it up to 7 basically, or whatever it is. We don't even know. That's the other thing. Like this is I love Emmys are great compared to the Oscars because we still don't even know. We'll know like when the ballots are out, but how many people are in the categories because that's dependent on the number of submissions in the category, which then you're getting into math. And I didn't get in, I don't know about you. Man, I did not get into this to do math.
No.
That's what calculators are for.
We're liberal arts people for a reason. The other thing about these late premiering things is the eligibility is so weird. Like you were just reminding me literally right before this that like, and Just Like That is premiering on HBO. I guess it's already out as we're recording this. It's coming out now, but it's not Emmy eligible because not enough of its episodes are airing. Whereas The Better Sister on Prime Video, all the episodes are premiering at once, so it is eligible. This is insane.
It's definitely complicated and confusing. And something like Poker Face maybe is the best example of this too, which is going to be actually eligible for series, and
all of its episodes will be eligible.
Well, so only the first 6 that are airing, because it's going to air as long as 6 have aired before the eligibility. It's all very complicated, but yes, and Just Like That, maybe next year's Emmys would be a possibility.
Do you not see them airing and Just Like That at this moment as them saying, it's okay, you don't have to nominate this for an
I think
Emmy.
there are some shows that are Emmy shows and some shows that are just shows. And I think Max or HBO Max or whatever it's called has decided that. And Just Like That is a show that people will enjoy and doesn't need to win awards.
I was having that same thought about The Gilded Age, which premieres on June 22nd, so it's fully out of this year's Emmy thing. But as soon as I saw that date for it, I was like, oh, they're not going to try for this again, because they've run it in Emmy season. You know, I did a big Q&A with it last year at the Academy Museum. It was a whole to-do. They spent a bunch of money on it. It kind of disappointed when it came to nominations, despite having some really great performers on it. So even though The Gilded Age is premiering 2 days away from the new season of The Bear, which is obviously a big Emmy show, that date felt to me like them saying, it's okay, we can chill out a little bit. Am I reading that wrong?
I think that's right. I mean, like, it's always tough with these summer shows. Then certain ones you're going to be like, oh, like The Bear we'll still be talking about.
Sure.
You can
Only
bring
Murders
that back.
is a summer show. That
Only
always comes back
Murders.
around.
It's tough. And it's like, it is tough to bring them back, though. I think with The Bear, not to get sidetracked on that, but I'm like, that having that come out in the June when phase 2 voting is happening, or in theory, like that helps. Yeah, I don't know. I guess The Gilded Age, though, maybe more teed up to be like, hey, enjoy this show, rather than it's going to win awards.
Because I think if you haven't been nominated for your first couple of seasons, it's just really hard to catch back up. Like Only Murders is interesting because I think we're now looking at it as maybe a real comedy contender when it hasn't been before, because of the way The Bear had a stranglehold. We've talked about it. You and I have. I've certainly talked about it on the show. But it was at least being nominated, like to get over that hump and like finally get attention for the first time and be premiering a full year before Emmy voting. That doesn't feel very likely to me.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. Well, I haven't seen the new season of The Gilded Age, so
maybe it'll be great.
Not to get sidetracked
Future
on
SAG,
that.
maybe a SAG nominee right in the winter.
Yeah, I guess
ensemble.
so. I mean, why do you think the networks do this? What is the advantage of Poker Face premiering as late as it did and having only half of it eligible? Is it just that it's too crowded another time? Does the recency bias thing work enough to make this confusion worth it?
I kind of think there's too much stuff, so like we have to figure out when we're going to release this. I don't envy like the people deciding these schedules at all, and I'm like, but I feel like with Poker Face, if you hold it any longer, then it's too long. Like that's the other issue, right? Like Poker Face was out a couple years ago, so you kind of need to get into this cycle. And I guess, it's tricky. I think it's case by case, but I do think that the idea in the past, at least, you used to see like shows premiering in the end, right? Like into this eligibility, right? And like kind of like crashing into May. And now I think we've seen, and we've kind of seen this in the film side too, like the later releases, it's much harder to break in. There's too much stuff, too many things drawing people's attention, and they've already kind of established what they like, and you're coming in late. It just does not, that strategy doesn't seem to work anymore in any medium, whether it's film or TV for awards. So like, I wonder if we'll start moving away from that further and further, and then maybe stuff that's coming in the fall will, in the spring, like in the late summer, will be more considered. Like this week, when we're recording this, Apple announced that the morning show, Katey, I'm sure one of your faves, is coming back in September, which will air through probably November. And I'm like, great, maybe that'll be,
You know what we need to do? We need more like September premieres, like the old fashioned, you're back in school premiere week, NBC Thursday night I would love that if we can get everyone kind of on the same schedule again. I know it'll never happen, but that just feels right.
I miss it. It's much easier, but what are you going to do?
Maybe that was part of the power of The Pit. It was kind of the throwback old network show, and it premiered in January, which, a mid-season replacement show would premiere like after the Super Bowl on ABC or something like that. There's some kind of subconscious element to that. Is there a best time to launch your show to get people to pay attention to it to Emmys? Is there any obvious window that everyone should be going after?
I mean, just from what you just said, I think you look at that January time. January, February feels right if you're going to do weekly. Like The Pit, I think, is a great example. White Lotus, too, even if the third season, was not as widely embraced. And Severance also. Those shows which premiered in the winter had a lot of runway to like build up audience and kind of like be there for people to find and enjoy. And maybe those are our top contenders, right, in these categories.
Yeah.
Whereas, and even something like The Studio, I think you could say, too, which premiered in March.
That's true, yeah.
I think that kind of built up. Hacks was interesting. It premiered in May, and they did kind of, or actually, no, sorry, it was April, and they did like a weird release schedule where they did like kind of like up and down and kind of two together and whatever. But still, that was the earliest it had premiered, too. Because I think previously it's been in May.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's something you do when you're in the power position, right? Like Hacks feel, as the reigning comedy champ, like I don't think it's a guarantee that they win it again. But it does feel like they're coming into a position of being like, we don't have to remind you that Hacks exists. Like we can air whenever we want, and you're going to vote for Gene Smart basically no matter what we do.
But I do think for the new shows, like May is almost too late. Like I'll be curious to see how 4 seasons, like Netflix has. In terms of their comedy output, it's like Nobody Wants This is like the big show that like everybody has watched. And so like that probably helps it get in. And The Residence was a spring, early, I think March premiere maybe, or February. But
yeah, I really liked The Residence. And I feel like it kind of fell down in attention at some point.
I think that's probably true, but like maybe that, but we'll see. Like 4 seasons, I feel like has built up, like people seem to like it. It did pretty well for them, like viewership wise, like it got attention. So I'll be curious to see if it actually makes it in, because I think if it was maybe April 1st instead of May 1st, maybe it does, but we'll see May 1st if that's enough time to get people to like watch a new show, embrace the new show, and vote for the new show.
That's an interesting month-long theory. I was also thinking about the 4 seasons and Forever, which both, that's a drama on Netflix about teenagers. And I wonder if premiering them in that late window is kind of a way to say, oh, we don't know if this is going to get a nomination. It feels maybe. So if it doesn't happen, we can kind of say, oh, it's fine. We never really intended it that way. Like it's not positioning it as strongly as if it were earlier in the season and kind of hedges your bets. That's kind of a coward's way out, but it also seems kind of smart to me.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that being a thing too. Forever, I feel like is another one that's like a TV show, not an Emmy show, but we'll see, I guess. Yeah,
I mean, I really liked it. It got renewed for a second season, so it'll have room to go. But embracing the shows that are just TV shows that you can enjoy that aren't for Emmys, even for psychos like us, I think is really valuable.
But then something like The Pit, which is, I think, just a TV show, could actually win drama series.
Yeah.
So there you go.
I want to talk about HBO in general, actually, as we lead into Mountainhead, because it is premiering a TV movie on the very last day of eligibility is weirdly a classic HBO move. But before we get to it, we talked about The Pit. We talked about Hacks. Those could very well be our comedy and drama winners, but also you have the seasons of The White Lotus and The Last of Us kind of getting a real muted reception to what we'd seen before. Like, what do you make of HBO's position in all of this in general?
I mean, it would be very kind of amusing, I guess, if HBO Max won both the top awards, which I do think I actually have predicted now. Because
have they done that before? They must have. Sopranos and Sex and the City must have lined up before.
I mean, like the streamer, especially after the name changing and stuff, which is amusing to me. I don't know. I thought White Lotus and Last of Us, I think those are like, in terms of that, like putting Hacks aside, but for the drama categories, it was like the 4 shows to me that most people would say have the best shot to win, or what, like White Lotus, Last of Us, The Pit, and Severance, right?
Yeah.
So you have 3 HBO shows in that. You're right. Like, I liked The Last of Us, and I enjoyed White Lotus, though I thought the finale of The White Lotus was not my fave.
Yeah.
And The Last of Us, pretty divisive response online, I would say. And so then you look at something like The Pit, which continues to be a show that I find people are incredibly enthusiastic about, really loved. And yeah, like there's like, I think The White Lotus and The Last of Us will have the most nominations, like probably 25, 27 nominations, like each. But then I think
they're complex enough. There's a lot of craft. And not that The Pit doesn't have a lot of great craft to it, but it's more straightforward of a show, I think.
But I do think when push comes to shove, people vote for what they love, and they're going to love The Pit more than those other shows. So I do think The Pit has like a great chance to win, unless Severance is like the non-HBO, non-Max show that pushes through. But I actually don't know if there's a lot of I think the people who love Severance, do you get this? That some people who love Severance like really, really love it.
Yes.
Tell you how much they love it. And then if you talk to other people, they're like, it's fine. And I wonder, like The Pit, I'm like, people who watch it are like, that was the best. I cried. I was really engaged. And I just find like that people are really enthused by it. And so I think that that'll actually help it push it over Severance.
That emotional pull. I mean, we talk about it in Oscars all the time, right? It's how Coda wins Overpower the Dog or something like that. And like Severance is a show that I love. And I do feel an emotional attachment to it, but it's not like The Pit. The Pit will like wring you out. And it's the kind of thing that makes me imagine someone holding their ballot and saying, you know what I loved was The Pit. And then you check it and that's how that works out.
Exactly. Because like people are going to vote, like we talk about with the Oscars all the time, and it's like they're going to vote for what they admire, right? Or nominate what they admire, but then vote to win what they loved. And like this is like Severance, I think you could really admire. And even those other shows, like we said, like The Last of Us, even if you didn't love the narrative, the story, I think you'd have to admire like the execution and like it's like this big scale show with like all these incredible crafts, and the same with like White Lotus. But you really love The Pit, right? So it's like you might just pick that to win. That's why I kind of, so.
Although it does make you think about Shogun, which like, again, had a lot of emotional moments. But I feel like that was more of an admire show than a love show for a lot of people. But it just, ran through everything. So sometimes it goes that way. So, okay, for Hacks and for the comedy thing, how did you feel about this season? I know you're a huge Hacks fan. How did you feel about this season of Hacks?
Well, I just loved it. I thought it was I thought the third season was the best they've done. I thought that was the best. I thought this was a great season. And the 9th episode, which has aired, was the best maybe they've ever done. When Deborah, are we going to spoil? The show's
this is
already
airing
out.
Next week, so we can, the finale will be out by the time this airs.
So like we could just spoiler alert, I guess if you haven't watched Hacks, but when Deborah like has to quit on air, gives up her show to go with Ava. I thought that was like their best episode yet.
It's the one they submitted for directing and writing, so clearly 100%. They played it.
And I was like, so I thought it's great. I think you've seen a lot of people, like, especially when the studio premiered, it was like the studio could really win. And I still think that's possible based on the fact that Hollywood loves a Hollywood story, right? We've seen this in movies. But then Hacks is also that same kind of story. And I just think that the perspective Hacks takes on the industry is more in line with the people within the industry versus the studio, which I think is like maybe the differentiator there.
Because the studio is more about the people at the top of the studio hierarchy.
Yes, the studio is about humanizing the executives who are kind of caught in the middle between the creative community and like the rich boardrooms, right? And Hacks is more about the people who are creating the TV and like specific, like in that 9th episode, like calling out like how even Deborah, who is a self-proclaimed capitalist pig, was like, how much is too much? And like, we can't be allowing. This is like, it used to be that you could just make it a good show and it made money and that was good. And that's not good enough anymore. And where's the line is kind of like the line of that. And I'm like, that to me is going to speak very loudly to people in the entertainment community. I feel like. So that to me is why Hacks could win. But like you were saying before, maybe Only Murders could sneak in. Obviously it won SAG Ensemble and like people really liked that fourth season. And it was a Hollywood season as well. And, maybe if people are like, oh, Hacks, we'll see. Like the finale, like you said this in your newsletter, was a lot different for.
I couldn't believe it when I watched that episode. It was like, am I really seeing what I'm seeing here? It is strange.
It kind of reminded me of like, remember the Sopranos episode where Tony gets shot and then is in a coma and he's like a different person. I think it's like Kevin Finnerty or whatever, right? And he's like on like his like journey or whatever. It's like,
it's experimental and it's
like
the style of prestige TV.
Way, right? Like kind of like, oh, and they're in a different country and all these different things. So I do think that like the hardcore fans will enjoy it, and it sets up what I think will be a great 5th season. Yeah. But it was like compared to the 9th episode, like obviously like a slower come down.
Yeah. I thought with the LA aspect of it, I thought it was interesting. So in my newsletter last week, which you edited, I had the rundown of all the categories that Hacks is submitting in, which, a lot of it is not surprising. These things get like put out as scoops, and it's like I could have told you that they were submitting Jean Smart and Lead Actress, obviously. But in the crafts categories, I thought it was interesting that they were focusing on the 4th episode, which is called I Love LA. And it's the one that ends, it not only ends with a tribute to the LA firefighters and the victims of the fires. And there's a shot of the house they used for Deborah's house, which burned down in Altadena. But it opens with this montage of all the craftspeople who make Deborah's show within a show. And a lot of those people, Paul Downs told me when I interviewed him earlier this season, are the people who actually work on Hacks. So it's like this tribute to the craftspeople. And I feel like that was a big focus of the fires, how hard it is to actually make a career of making these things. That's a ton of the Emmy voters. So, and the episode doesn't feel cynical. I mean, maybe some people who like Hacks less than we do would say that. But I did think that was really smart of a thing to put people's focus on, of knowing that these Emmy voters are a lot of people who work in this industry or wish they were working more in this industry and know how hard it is to get that kind of shine, especially when voting in those below the line categories. I thought was a really smart move.
I totally agree. And even in the 9th episode, I think there's a line there, Paul's character, Jimmy, is like, they're talking about keeping production in LA, right? Like, it's obviously another big thing. And he's like, I emailed Gavin Newsom. I don't know what you want me to do. Like, I'm trying, it's just like, so I feel like that would help push Hacks above these other shows. That said, no one was really expecting Hacks to beat The Bear last year. Mm-hmm. So it's not like Hacks is like a dominant front runner, I feel like. And as much as like I love the show, it's vulnerable to lose to one of these other shows, whether that's Only Murders, The Studio, or even The Bear, which everyone has now given up on and forgotten about, but was a record-setting Emmy nominee last year. And obviously most expected, even with the muted response to season 3. Muted seems like a fair way to describe it. Most expected it to win comedy series, right? And then it lost in an upset. So now I'm like, what if season 4, like the thing I keep going back to is like, man, what if season 4 of The Bear is great? And it's already going to get these nominated. It's like, it's clearly going to get nominated in all these categories. It doesn't matter that the 3rd season was not as good as the 2nd season. Like, people are still going to say comedy series Bear and all these actors for The Bear and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, what if the 4th season is great when they're voting in phase 2? Maybe they're just going to be like, oh, I love The Bear again. I'm just going to have The Bear win. I mean, it is possible.
Great theory.
It just depends on whether this season is actually good, I guess.
It's also interesting that they have done so little phase 1 promotion for The Bear. Like, those actors have been everywhere every previous year. And this year it's super quiet. And they'll do a push for when the season comes out, I assume. So they're kind of assuming that phase 1 is a fait accompli, which I think makes perfect sense. So it would time up really well for that buzz around the 4th season to do exactly what you're saying it would do.
And then maybe it becomes like a 4. And like you said, maybe if we'll see how people respond to the finale. I do think the 4th season was received well.
Yeah.
So we'll see, like, how it works. And I don't know. I still have Hacks winning, but I think that it's vulnerable and there's still room to that race to shake out in different ways.
Yeah. One last thing on The Studio.
Yes.
I do think like The Studio is not as focused on the people who actually like make the movies, as you're saying, but it makes everything beautiful. Like that, I think we talked about that Golden Globes episode makes the room of the Golden Globes look gorgeous, which in real life it is like overlit and crowded and all of the things that are not that glamorous. So there's this magic to The Studio that I think is really appealing. And like maybe people are feeling so burned out that the magic doesn't work on them. But it is a different tone than what you're getting from Hacks that I think could be really appealing.
I love both shows. It's a gorgeous show. If it won like cinematography, obviously, I mean, be way in.
Is cinematography? Do they do cinematography for comedy and drama?
I think they do 30 and 60. So it's like I think it could win for 30 minutes for any of these Adam Newport Barra episodes. Episode
of The Studio 30 minutes?
Well, I think it's like a loose 30 minutes because I remember I'm just going off the cuff here, but I remember like Mandalorian getting in for like 30-minute cinematography, I think, or something or whatever.
So many of these categories are so meaningless at this point, but what can we do with them? Okay, I do want to talk about Mountain Head, which I watched right before we recorded this, and I do think is an interesting way into not only the HBO strategy. As I said, it's been a couple years in a row that they've released a movie basically on May 31st to varying degrees of success. It's also like the return of Jesse Armstrong. It's like more or less hey, you missed Succession. Here's another dispatch from the world of Succession with none of the same characters. And also the TV movie category is eternally strange. And I don't know how many people are like dying to see if Mountain Head gets a nomination, but it's interesting to see HBO continuing to play in this field, which they like dominated forever. Like the peak of it was probably in like the early 2010s with like the Game Change era and stuff like that. So it feels like this could do about as well as anything does well in this strange TV movie category.
Yeah, the category is weird because like I feel like I've seen articles about this too recently too, and just in conversations, like the idea of a TV movie doesn't really exist anymore because a lot of these are just movies that are now streaming, right? Like Bridget Jones' Mad About the Boy is a contender in TV movie.
Yeah.
That's a real movie that would just happen to be on Peacock and was in theaters around the world, but not in the US. So it's like, it is kind of like a weird, outdated idea.
Yeah.
That said, like these are like really, it is an interesting category. And I kind of wish now, like they lump all these together again. Like you don't need more Emmy categories. Like we were just saying, like you can't even keep up with like the 90 that they have. Mm-hmm. But it is weird to me that like the actors from Mountainhead are going to compete alongside like the actor or like Colin Farrell. You know what I mean? It just doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, because
like, I feel like we should
TV
just have,
movie and limited series are lumped together in the acting categories.
Maybe we should have like acting TV, like non-theatrical movies, maybe we call it, and like have them have like make it like an Oscars, like a brief Oscars-y Emmys category.
But it also makes no sense that like Fountain of Youth, the Apple movie that I watched to my dismay, isn't going to qualify in this, even though it's a TV movie in absolutely every way. Like the distinction, again, that's another rule that in this modern like, content era doesn't really make any sense.
Not at all. I'm surprised that, I feel like if it did, though, you would be all over Fountain of Youth for all your Emmy predictions. It seems like you loved it so much.
It's certainly more expensive than most of the ones that you're going to see out there. Do you think Mountainhead is interesting as a movie? Is this anything that anyone's going to be talking about by the time this episode comes out?
I do think it, like, obviously, like, HBO really put the hard push on this, which in theory, like, I've never even heard of anything like this, where it was like announced, shot, and released in like 3 months, basically, which is just absolutely crazy.
This is clearly like someone who was used to pumping out episodes of Succession on a pretty quick clip and was like, I still got it. I'm going to just like, and I don't think Mountainhead is as good as a season of Succession, but I don't think it feels rushed when you watch it. It feels small because it's all shot in one house, but
it feels rushed in terms of how timely it is. And I think that's part of the reason why, like, that Jesse Armstrong wanted to do it so quickly. But like, yeah, like we were talking, like at this a peek behind the curtain cave, but we had conversations at my previous show with HBO, and they were like, oh, we have like, and this was after the Oscars, and they were like, oh, we have a cool thing that we're not really allowed to say, but like hopefully it's going to be, the deals will close and we'll announce it. And it was this. And I was like, I can't believe how fast this is really was like not even, it's not a joke that they were like really like still working on this in the spring. And here it is, the end of the spring, and it's still out. I think people will care about it because of Jesse Armstrong, because it's a Succession, his first thing since Succession, and it has a great cast of famous people or people who are cool, like, and I think that'll help. I'd be curious to see how the response so far has been much better than I expected, to be perfectly honest, having watched it. But
I think I liked it more than you did, but it's probably divisive.
I think if you like Succession, it's going to be like, oh, this is just like that same, it's like Succession again.
Yeah.
So, and I think it'll get nominated in this TV movie category just because of it being HBO, and even though it's late, I think it's one that people will want to flag as something they're interested in because of how Succession was such an Emmys fave.
I do think there's something uniquely satisfying about Mountainhead after the past 5 months of the Trump administration, where so it's the idea that these 3 billionaires and their friend who is not quite a billionaire, and therefore they call him Soup Kitchen, played by Jason Schwartzman, who is like really on a roll lately. I was just thinking about how, like, I guess I last saw him in The Last Showgirl and Queer, and he's like delightful in both of those flawed movies. So good for Jason Schwartzman. So he's hosting his billionaire friends, who are played by Steve Carell, everywhere. This guy like is popping up on every TV show you can imagine, apparently. Corey Michael Smith, last seen playing Chevy Chase in what was that movie called? Saturday Night?
Saturday Night.
Thank you. Okay. It's
great. One of my faves.
My brain has gone blank from last year's Oscar season. And then Rami Youssef is the fourth person in that quartet. So they are at this like mountain retreat, like classic Succession, like helicopter shots, black cars pulling up the driveway, like close-ups on the details of this house. Like it, again, feels like all the Roys going on to their vacation home. But while they're holed up there, the app that Corey Michael Smith's character created has unleashed complete global chaos. And hearing them justify it to themselves about like, well, people are expendable. We have to reset a new world order. How many eggs are you willing to break to make an omelet? Like that kind of thing. After all the like Doge, like how much money is the VA worth really? Like that kind of conversation. It does feel timely and pointed in a way that Succession sometimes could, but it was like more of a, classic family drama. But it doesn't feel, it's on the nose. I'm not going to say it's not, but it doesn't feel annoying or obvious. It feels like you kind of are glimpsing into how these guys talk to each other when you're not around, which is impressive.
it really, the thing that terrified me was the AI. I guess I'm just naive, Katey, because I have not really thought too deeply about it in this way. But I was like, one of the you mentioned like the app that Corey Michael Smith's character's name is Venice, not Venus, and it's spelled like penis but with a V. Very clever. So Venice creates this app that like has like AI deepfakes that are indiscernible from news broadcasts.
Yeah.
And then using those fake news broadcasts to sow incredible violence and
like
discord.
Real violence, yeah.
Like real violence. And I was like, wow, I never even thought that was a possibility. And now everything I look at, I'm like, is this is our future? So that like was not a fun watch.
But then you see those guys in their chateau being like, oh, that's not a real video of the president, mayor of Paris being assassinated. But they're also turning their skepticism to the real things. And again, like this idea of these billionaires like not totally thinking of people as real people, like I think that's really real. And putting it in the context of the satire, which I think falters. Like I think as the story goes on, it's a little hard to sustain in this like single house. It's hard for any movie to sustain something in a single house. But there's a lot of sharpness in there, and a lot of there's a lot of billionaires on TV this spring. I'm going to write about it at some point, but this one is like the absolute most pointed at the current moment that we're in.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, as a movie, I think it'll like do fine. Like I guess, and in terms of the Emmys, like I think that it will probably get nominated in this category, but I don't know if the actors will. Make it there.
Well, I guess it's also up against a real TV movie that made a real impact in Rebel Ridge, which is a Netflix movie that, again, why this is a TV movie and whatever else Netflix has released, Electric State isn't. Great question. But Rebel Ridge is one of like the rare TV movie that feels like something that like really mattered and people really talked about. So that could be an interesting competition.
I like Rebel Ridge a lot. I feel like that, but I'm also like, I'd be curious to see if it actually ends up making it through. I think it'll get nominated for sure. I also think like Nona's another Netflix movie that will probably be maybe here, because I think again the people who liked it, like we were talking about before with like The Pit, kind of like the things people liked, and I'm just like I don't think they're thinking too deeply about this category. No disrespect to any of these great projects in the TV movie category, because I think it's like you're kind of like it's not taken as seriously, unfortunately, as like these other main categories. Yeah. Like another one was Out of My Mind, which is a Disney Plus, another weepy kind of like drama, like a feel-good drama. And I was like, oh, that could make it in.
You're breaking news to me that this exists. This is fascinating.
I know, but I'm like, I think this is like, these are like the kind of things that'll end up being there. Yeah. But I mean, like, we'll see. Rebel Ridge is a fantastic movie. One of my favorites from last year as a movie. Yeah. And I'll be curious to see like how it plays with Emmy voters, if they remember it. I think it did well. I think like it got maybe a PGA nomination.
Yeah, it definitely showed up in those like winter awards in some way.
So like I think that's part of the reason why people are excited about it still.
Yeah. Okay, we have a lot of Emmys to talk about going forward. As I wrap us up to get to Jason Segel, like lay your cards on the table. What are you rooting for in Emmy season? I guess you already made it clear on Hack. So what's your other horse that you want to ride all the way through? I mean,
I really would love to see The Pit kind of win. I think that would be a lot of fun, because it is, like we were saying, like it is a kind of a traditional TV show. And while these other shows are fantastically made and they're all like very high class productions, I think the really like the basicness of The Pit is a feature, not a bug. And so I would definitely be pushing for that. And then I guess I just really love HBO Max. I guess I'm back in. I don't know. I gotta get like a hoodie or something that says HBO Max for the next one of these.
Yeah, wear your Ankler hat and your HBO Max hoodie, and you'll just be repping for all the brands that you love. I'm very excited for the Chris Rosen era on this podcast. We'll talk again soon.
Oh, I'm so excited, Katey. Thank you for having me.
I'll be back in a moment with my conversation with star shrinking Jason Segel. This podcast is supported by Netflix, presenting Squid Game. From Emmy award-winning director Hwang Dong-hyuk, the second installment of the award-winning global phenomenon stars lead actor Lee Jung-jae in his return to the games, facing off against disguised frontman Lee Byung-hun and a new cast of players. The Hollywood Reporter lauds Squid Game pop culture's most urgent and salient work of art. And IGN calls it masterful, a gripping reflection of the world around us today. For your Emmy consideration in all categories, including Outstanding Drama Series. So now let's let's hear my conversation with Jason Segel. He is the star as well as the co-creator of the Apple TV Plus series Shrinking. And I, like many people, grew up watching Jason Segel on television, first in Freaks and Geeks and then for a long time on How I Met Your Mother. And that's a fact that he seems really well aware of. When he's talked about the pretty dark and sometimes challenging character he plays on Shrinking, which is a comedy, he talks about it as having earned up a lot of likability by playing TV characters who were like your best friend. And now he gets the chance to spend it by going to a lot of darker places on Shrinking. On the show, Segel plays a therapist who decides to break a lot of the rules and moral codes of his profession, but also starts getting results from it with his patients, as well as helping him process his own grief over the death of his wife before the series begins. But the show's also a real ensemble around his character. It's kind of built around the workplace his character shares with characters played by Harrison Ford and Jessica Williams, but it goes really wide beyond that. It's co-created by Bill Lawrence, who is kind of the king of the Hangout show. So I talked to Jason Segel about building up the world of Shrinking and expanding it in the second season, as well as how he's changed the way he thinks about his own work over the years, and a little bit about what they've been up to in season 3, which has been in production in Los Angeles. You can hear it all in my conversation with Shrinking's Jason Segel. So technically we're here to talk about Shrinking season 2, since that is the season that's been out, but you guys have been back in production on season 3 for a couple months at this point, right?
Yeah, we're about halfway through right now.
Okay.
So we're right in the middle of the marathon, but it's going great. And, it's actually a cool thing. Usually the challenge, I think, of doing multiple seasons, because I've done it before, is that you start repeating storylines or you start to feel like you're stretching material out as far as it'll go before it breaks. But the thing we discovered in season 1 is that every one of these actors could be the lead in their own show. So all of a sudden, we kind of had infinite material and infinite options and directions we can go, because now everybody gets these fully realized arcs, and the possibilities are pretty limitless.
Yeah. Well, you also have this kind of like, there's the hook for the show in the very beginning where you've got this guy who's like doing therapy the unconventional way. But like that's only going to take you so far. You can't kind of like have the like, the whole like concept be around this one thing. And as the show evolves, it becomes this kind of like broader canvas, like you're saying. But it feels like you were also really taking it on because you could challenge yourself, because you're playing this guy who's really going through it. And in season 2, he continues going through it. But you also kind of have to, move beyond that at a certain point. So how have you been able to kind of keep that challenge aspect of it up while, like Jimmy's got all these people surrounding him who he loves? Like there's a lot of healthy relationships in it that weren't there when the show started.
Yeah, I think we try to pick a true north for each season. And season 1 was grief. And it was very much about, someone starting out in a hole and having to dig their way out of it and grab onto the arms of their friends and family and get out. And season 2, I think the true north of that episode was moving forward. And forgiveness, Yeah. So, and we found like fractals of that in everybody's storyline. Because once you get to 0, what now? You're sort of left with, you're out of danger. Jimmy is now out of this kind of immediate territory and into now kind of cleaning up the wreckage of the past. So that's what season 2 was about. And season 3 is about moving forward, is once you've kind of cleaned up all the damage, how do we start living again?
So then where does the, not to spoil what's happening in season 3, where do the new challenges come in for you in terms of what you get to do on screen?
I think it's really cool to watch somebody actually try to rebuild their life and sort of start fresh at 45 years old.
Yeah.
I'm 45 all of a sudden. It's crazy. Like people call me Mr. Segel.
Who? like people on set?
When I met my TV daughter for the first time, in my head, and I'm sure this is true of everyone as they age, but I'm like, this is my contemporary.
Yeah.
And I think the first thing she said was, "I loved you in Muppets, Mr. Segel."
Because she was probably like 8 when the movie came out.
Yeah, she was like the exact age.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been an interesting adjustment, which I actually love.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, season 3, which we're on now, to watch someone try to date at 45 years old for the first time and not know how to do it, and what it looks like to rebuild a life after the one that you worked so hard to create has been burned to the ground.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much of this stuff when you talk about the show, like, you know, anyone talking about a show would talk about the themes and the character development, but Shrinking is so special because it's all on the surface. Like, there's the therapy part of it also, but just like people talking about what they are going through in a way that feels to me kind of revolutionary on TV. Like, TV has changed a lot since, you know, we all started watching it, but like it's putting a lot of stuff out on the surface that I don't think you could have done 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Like, does it feel that way to you guys? Like that you're getting away with something or that you're pushing that envelope in some way?
I think the truth of it is that all of the kind of creators up top are real softies. And so we have this interesting mix of loving hard comedy, like big set comedy pieces, big laughs. For us, the litmus test of is it funny is are you actually laughing?
Yeah.
Not that kind of pleasant, like, oh, that's funny. You know, so we're trying to get really big laughs, but I feel like everybody kind of creating the show, I know certainly I feel things like seemingly disproportionate to the occasion. I've been noticing from being a human being, like, whereas most people can kind of brush things off, it sticks with me. And I think you know, broadcast news was a big sort of model for I think the tone of what we were trying to create. The early James Brooks, this tone of life where you have these crazy set comedy pieces, like when Albert Brooks is sweating on the broadcast. But then you also have that scene with Holly Hunter and Albert Brooks where he says, I'm in love with you. I buried the lead. And that scene, like, he puts it all out there. And within one scene, it goes from comedy to real honest, like, put my heart on the line drama. And it also does this thing, which I think our show does well, which is people, like, under emotional duress act really weird. Like, it's really, you know, it's funny. And like your body behaves weird and you tense up and you move your arms weird when you're mad. And I think we try to find that stuff because it's just like, it's so relatable. Life is awkward. Yeah.
Well, and broadcast news also has Holly Hunter, you know, it must be great being the smartest person in the room. And she says it's awful. Like, it's awful. Like, people are trapped in the prison that they've made for themselves, which I feel like Shrinking does too. Like, people saying, I know what I'm doing is the bad choice, and I'm kind of stuck doing it anyway. And that also feels really refreshing to watch.
Yeah, and I think all three of them in broadcast news. I know I'm talking too much about broadcast news.
Please talk about broadcast news.
Okay. I think one of the things that I really took from that writing wise is that in a lesser movie, one of them turns out to be a villain.
Yeah.
But in broadcast, so the choice becomes really clear. But in broadcast news, they're all great and they're all flawed. And, you know, I think that in Shrinking, we try to do the same thing. Everybody in the show, like both as actors, but I'm talking about the characters, are all trying their best. Like, they're all lovely. And they're also all flawed.
And not boring by being lovely.
Thank you.
Which is, I mean, I assume that's something you have to talk about in the writer's room. Like, if you've got something where everyone is friends and everyone wants to do right by each other, you run out of conflict really quickly. Like, I don't know how conscious that is when you go to sit down to write the seasons, but, you know, it's got to be hard to figure out.
Yeah. Although I think that with good writing, and our writing staff is just incredible, the seemingly smallest things can become a central issue if you write them funny enough and write them right. Like my best friend Brian finding out that there's a secret I didn't tell him.
Yeah.
This isn't a giant plot move, but you get to explore this whole other territory of like, are we actually best friends? You know, or did we just make friends in college? And now 20 years later, we actually aren't really best friends anymore. That becomes a whole dramatic storyline that you like is on paper little. And in practice is something we deal with all the time.
So you had been talking about I think before you were taking on Shrinking, you had said you started out working with your friends, obviously really young, and then kind of made the choice to work with people who you didn't know who could teach you something and kind of like fill up your skills in that way. So then when you start working with Bill Lawrence and Brett Goldstein, who I don't think you had a strong relationship with either of them before, like, do you then become friends and still try to learn with them? How does that relationship shift after 3 years? Like, do you still feel like it's a different dynamic than maybe what you had started out doing when you were younger?
It's a really interesting thing, Shrinking, and I like narrativize my life probably too much. It's how my brain works. But Shrinking to me, in terms of my like artistic path over the past decade, a little bit more, since How I Met Your Mother ended. It feels like the end of an M. Night Shyamalan movie where suddenly it all makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I went pretty hard into trying to become as good as I could as a dramatic actor and pick up some tools on that front. And the whole time I had friends saying, like, this is great. Like, you should do what makes you happy, but don't forget, you're also like really good at comedy. You don't throw that away. But for a while,
did you feel like you were going to have to? Like, did it feel like a real binary thing that you were going to have to do?
No, but I started paying more attention to what I was thinking about than trying to be strategic, which I think was a real lesson for me. Like, I should be making art that is reflective of what I'm thinking about in my life at the time, so that there is something vital that you're like catching on film. That to me, as I've thought a lot about it, is the nature of what I would like to do, is be willing to really honestly go through something on screen and have that maybe be of use to someone who's going through the same thing in their life.
Sure.
Like almost like a surrogate experience, you know?
Yeah.
I wasn't thinking in those terms, and it's probably too lofty a way to think, but I was like, the broadest example is at 33 years old, I'm like a 6'4" tall man who's had a lot of success, and like I got a lot of scripts about being afraid of girls. And it just, you know what I mean? And
You're too tall to be afraid of girls? Is that the...
Well, it's not where I was in my life, where
Sure.
it just felt like, why am I it's not what I'm thinking about at all.
Yeah.
And so anyways, that is to say, like, I did a lot of dramatic work and learned just a ton. And then I also like started to get the itch to want to do comedy again. And then right at that moment, it's like the universe it gave me End of the Tour when I wanted to do dramatic work. And it gave me Shrinking at this moment when it was time to reconcile all the stuff. Because Shrinking, like, one day you're going to go in and do a broad set comedy piece where you throw up at the piano, and the next day you're going to rip your guts out and tell your daughter how sorry you are. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is what this whole search has been about. I can do all this stuff and I'm not afraid.
Yeah. One of the dramatic movies that I feel like I just have to mention is Our Friend, which I thought was so terrific. I saw it in Toronto, and like I feel like it got seen by about 8 more people after that.
Yes.
But I don't know if they're like where that falls. I assume that's with the end of the tour in terms of getting the dramatic chops. But I hope you took a lot from making that, because I thought it was a great movie.
I did. Hey, thank you so much. I took a lot from all of them, because I think that process, it's like so interesting doing this job. I feel like so much of it is getting to a place where when they say action, you're not scared. Mm-hmm. It's like that between action and cut, you're floating. And so, all of those projects got me to the place where if I'm standing across from somebody I really admire, I feel like I belong, as opposed to feeling like an imposter, all those things.
And so you feel like before doing that dramatic turn, like you let yourself get intimidated by someone you'd be on camera with, or, not be able to act with Harrison Ford on a daily basis, I guess.
I think what I felt was I got plucked out of a high school theater doing drama, and it's the luckiest thing that ever happened to me. But I met Judd Apatow and started doing these comedies, and I got on How I Met Your Mother. And my 20s took a really comedic path, and God, I'm so lucky. Even to just get in the door is a big deal. But at some point I was like, now I just wonder if I'm good at that stuff, at the drama. And I don't want to be the guy who spends his whole life sitting at the dinner party saying, like, well, if I had done End of the Tour, I would have, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I wanted to find out. It was really important to me to find out. I don't want to leave anything on the table like I wish I had tried that.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing that's also hard to talk about because getting in the door is so difficult. But when you have the choice, when you're given the option saying, hey, what do you want to make? What do you want to do? I feel like that can be really paralyzing for people who get to that moment and saying, like which path is the right path. You can kind of freak yourself out and not make any choices that way.
Yeah, I didn't even I started so young and got swept up. I didn't even really know you had a choice. Yeah. And I think that was like my first stepping into my adulthood or stepping into my ownership of my career. But, I got very successful very young, and I wrote Sarah Marshall when I was very young and it did well. And so then you're, of course, like encouraged to keep doing that and like capitalize on that. People are digging that work you're doing.
Yeah.
And it makes a lot of sense. I think that for me, it wasn't until How I Met Your Mother ended and I could see a more blank canvas that I realized like, oh, you can make choices. And then you're confronted with this crazy reality, which is like, you're super excited because now you're going to try dramas. And it turns out nobody cares.
That's just indie films. It's like, it's tough out there.
Yeah. And so you have to be willing to accept that too, that just because something is important to you doesn't mean it's going to matter to anybody else, but you put your head down. And it was an important thing because I started to realize like, this is your life. And so how do you want to spend your time? I had already had a lot of success in a lot of different ways. And so I couldn't keep making it about external stuff.
Yeah. Well, I also wanted to ask about the show that you created before Shrinking, Dispatches from Elsewhere, which premiered like a month into COVID, which is just the wildest timing. And you kind of did that on your own. It's super personal. It's like kind of the kind of thing that even now I'm like, God, would anyone let that get made these days?
I know. Like, I Trojan horsed it.
Yeah, seriously. Like, I mean, it feels like so many shows in the last 10 years have gotten Trojan horse in that way. But, what do you take away from having pulled that off? And, you chase down this thing that you really want to do. You get it actually to exist. And then how do you figure out what to do once you've been able to do that?
I think the Dispatches from Elsewhere was the tunnel that brought me out of a kind of block that I was in. I hadn't written anything since Muppets. And I really couldn't figure out what I wanted to write about. I was really blocked. Like, I didn't quite know what to do. And I saw this documentary about this crazy art experiment that happened in San Francisco that was like a grown-up scavenger hunt, but it lasted for 2 years and it was fully immersive. And it was about reminding people to reconnect with their sense of childlike wonder, not to be defined by boxes and to go out and experience life and find the beauty in the world right around you. And I think for me, it was what was missing at the time. And I just put my head down because I had, for the first time in like a decade, I had this sense of, I know how to write this. Yeah. And so I got in touch with them. And after a really weird process that's in the show, they gave me the rights to it. And I wrote it. And it was the same part of me that wrote the Dracula puppet musical. It was, believe me, Dracula puppet musical makes sense now that the movie has come out and done well.
I invented the Dracula puppet musical.
I cannot tell you how many people told me, like, that makes no sense. You can't end a romantic comedy with a lavish puppet musical, like all of these things. But I had the naivety of youth and I was like, no, this is beautiful and I know this will work. And I also was self-aware. I also knew it was weird and silly, all of these things. And I think that's true of Dispatches also, that it was something that was weird and silly and joyful and also probed my thesis of art and life, which is that we're all really similar. I really think that I really take this artistic leap when I'm doing acting. Like, if I go through this really honestly, it will be pretty close to how other people feel about grief, how other people feel about a breakup, I think we all feel things somewhat similarly.
Well, I assume that when people talk about Shrinking, there's a lot of personal stuff that comes up from people. I mean, it hits on so many of the big human emotions. Like, you're really putting yourself up as an avatar on that show in that way.
Yeah. And everybody is. And I think what's really cool about Shrinking is that you have this kind of age range from Alice, my daughter, who's playing 17, all the way up to Harrison, who's playing 41. And
he and I look about the same, I think.
But everybody can relate to somebody in this story. I think like the Liz and Derek storyline of a marriage that emerges this season with like a hint of infidelity, I think is also a really relatable storyline that people go through. Like, is an indiscretion the end of your marriage, or do people make mistakes and you recognize them for their humanity? Like, I watched that storyline. I thought, whoa, it's actually like probably less people are going to come up to you in the street and say I relate. But I bet a lot of people do,
Yeah. So you had all this time, you got through that writing block. What's your relationship like with writing now? Obviously, Shrinking's this ongoing thing. That's a lot of people. Are you writing other stuff more now? How does that fit in with your work process?
Yeah, I'm writing a movie. I think we're going to shoot it this summer, knock on wood.
Nice.
Yeah. It's the first feature I've written in quite a while, and I've had the idea for 10 years, and I just hadn't felt ready to write it. And then, so the way writing works for me is, writing, as I'm sure you know, is just very hard, and it takes a long time, and it's you versus yourself. And I think anyone who writes professionally, like, has a very conflicting relationship with it. At least that's been my experience. So I try really hard not to write. And then this idea, if it's the one, it just like nags at me until it won't let me not write it. And so, yeah, I wrote this movie that's like a psychological thriller that I've been thinking about for a long time.
Cool. How is it trying to get a movie made these days? Everyone says it's rough out there. Do you have any better luck than is it different than it was in 2007? I'm guessing it's a little different.
My experience in those years was crazy. Like our group was in this little pocket where if we had an idea that was like, funny, they would greenlight the movie. It's not like that, at least for me right now. Yeah. But the hard part about getting stuff made, I think, is just like not getting demoralized. But I have this thing of just like, I really think it's going to be possible as long as I stick to it, so I'm willing to do a rewrite of the script. I think that's one of my weird strengths is that I don't get stopped by like negative feedback too often. Okay. I just try to figure out what the issue is and snake my way around it.
So you don't have the, like, I put my heart out to you, and if you have anything mean to say about it, it's you destroying me. Like, you can compartmentalize and move on.
It wrecks me, but it doesn't. It wrecks me, but it doesn't stop me from figuring it out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, everything's impossible. I have this, like, philosophy about when you're making anything, including writing, and I tell it to my friends, is that, like, every step that you complete, you should go out and get nachos or ice cream and say, like, we did it. Like, writing the end on a script, you've achieved the impossible. It's really hard. It's 120 pages, and it's freaking hard. Yeah. Getting somebody to say they want to produce it, go get nachos. Getting someone to say they want to make it, go get nachos. And I think that it's really easy in this business where there's also this propaganda machine of success to keep moving your goalpost so that you never win. Like, they're making it, but let's see how it does. Yeah, it did pretty well, but let's see if it gets nominated for an award. We got nominated, let's see if it wins. And you end up never feeling good. And that's like one of the things I've learned from all this. There was a whole period where I was like doing so well, but I never felt good. And I realized it was because I wasn't acknowledging every time you achieve the impossible. This stuff is like crazy. It's what you dream of as a kid. Yeah.
So do you take that with you when you have, like, going to the Golden Globes or something with the Shrinking cast? It's just a lot of like, okay, this is the victory. Like, can you keep that in mind when you're surrounded by all of that mayhem?
Look, even this podcast is a victory. Like, it means something. It means we did something that you want to talk about. Sure. Pretty cool. Yeah.
Well, when you have something like Shrinking that's kind of, it's going on its third season, it's running, it's got this whole thing behind it. Does that kind of engine running say, like, okay, I've pulled this off, that's going to be good. Now I can, like, boost myself up to write the script or something like that. Does having that success kind of beget the next one, I guess is the question.
This may be revealing, like, too much about me, but I think that what it does mostly is, like, it alleviates some fear. There's, I think any of these jobs that are sort of transitory, like acting or writing, having something steady in your life alleviates this, like, fear of, is it over?
Yeah, sure. Have they forgotten about me?
Yeah. Am I going to get to do the next thing? Even though I'm 25 years in, it seems like the evidence should make me feel like you're going to get to keep making stuff, but I can't wrap my hands around it.
Yeah. Well, you were talking earlier about the craziness of your 20s, and I feel like what so much of us get to do in our 20s is do a bunch of stuff that then gets forgotten by time, and we don't have to think about again. And you don't have that luxury, and it's a great luxury that you have. But I was listening to you on Conan O'Brien's podcast talking about forgetting Sarah Marshall in depth, and obviously there's so much affection for that. But is there the part of you being like, God, can my 20-something self take a break for a little while? Does it feel haunting in any way to have to confront your younger self so often?
No, it doesn't. And as a matter of fact, we always say we wish our older selves could go back. What would you tell your younger self?
Yeah.
I think the reverse is also true. What do I have to learn from my younger self? Because there was a period where I did not understand why it was hard. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Making stuff, getting a movie made. I was just like, of course this is going to get made.
Yeah.
Of course, if I write something good enough, they're going to want to make it. And of course, we end this movie with a puppet musical. And of course, I do full frontal nudity. And so I try to I actually try to draw inspiration from that period of fearlessness a bit. And I think to myself, on anything I'm doing, on Winning Time or on Shrinking, which is what I've been up to most recently. I actually just did a movie that's really cool also. But you become really familiar with the correct choice, I think, as an actor. You do so much acting, you're you read it and you know how to do it.
Yeah.
And I try to remind myself, don't do that. Mm-hmm. Don't do the way that you know how to do it, because it means you've done it before or you've seen it before.
Yeah.
If it's already in there, let's find something new. Let's figure out. You look at somebody like Nicolas Cage, and you're like, God, for better or for worse, every performance is so interesting. It is, all these choices are so brave. And I want to have a little bit of that in me. And I was talking about yesterday with somebody. I also want to have a really healthy dose of Paul Giamatti in everything I do, which is a guy who is completely unafraid to be honest between action and cut. Yeah. There is no showing off when they say action. That is a guy who's going to let you watch while he feels something. And that, I react disproportionately to Paul Giamatti's acting.
I mean, I think you got a heart, don't we all?
Totally.
Gets somewhere. Well, and that's the blessing of a long career too. We watch Shrinking and watching Harrison Ford. It's God, I've been watching him do something new and surprise me for my entire life. What a gift, and to get to, continue to find new things in your career. And I imagine that's what anyone would hope for watching him work.
There's a scene, I don't want to give any spoilers, but in the finale of season 2 where Harrison Ford gives a speech, and to sit in that room was an honor.
Yeah. To
watch somebody at that stage in their career talking about some very meta stuff about, I don't know how much longer I get to do this job.
Yeah.
Again, it was somebody being incredibly honest between action and cut. And to me, if I've come to believe anything about acting, it's that's it. How much are you willing to show between action and cut and not show off?
That does it for today's episode. Again, I'll be back with a special Saturday episode as Emmy season goes in full force, so come back and hear us then. This podcast is edited by Brett Fuchs and produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dave Gonzalez. Thanks again to my co-host, my colleague, Chris Rosen. Subscribe to the Prestige Junkie newsletter at theankler.com and subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you this weekend.